Sandy, can you throw our agenda up on the screen, please? Thank you. Okay, so we have our monthly finance committee meeting. We'll go through a few things, the May financials, the June utility billing aging reports. Sarah is on the line to talk about ARPA. Nick is on the line to talk about the water treatment plant pump addition that is part of our budget amendment for council on Monday. And then we have the mayor to do a mayor's update. So I'll jump into the financial statements, which are on the next page. Thank you. So I'm sure you've already looked through these. Our numbers are still looking really good. When you do the comparisons, the year-to-date 2020 versus 2019, you'll see that these are March tax numbers. So sales tax is still doing okay, but we noticed the hotel motel tax started declining this time last year. So when we're looking at those ratios, it's probably better to be looking at 2019 at this point because we are entering the COVID numbers for 2020. I did receive numbers from Department of Revenue yesterday for June 2021, which would be our April numbers. They didn't make it in the agenda because it was too late, but I will send those out and get them uploaded on the website with the recording and this agenda. Sales tax and hotel motel are both at record highs again this time. Sales tax was about 165,000, which was up almost 50% from 2020. And then hotel motel tax was at 146,000, which was at 131% of 2020. But again, you have to remember that 2020 was a COVID number. So I'll send those out so you can see the trends, but definitely the highest April numbers we've seen. So things are continuing to do well. I know it's been really, really busy. Expecting a busy weekend, everybody beating the heat this weekend. So we'll see if that trend keeps on going. As far as the financial statements overall, everything's looking really good. Shared utility fund is still hurting, struggling. At the end of May, we were about $8,100 in the negative. So again, we're gonna talk about fixing that as we jump into ARPA. We actually did get notice that we're getting our first installment of the ARPA funds tomorrow. So we're watching our bank account for that. And what we did to kind of account for it is next month when we put out the June financials, you'll see a new fund. Our city code had a cumulative reserve fund that we haven't used. So we created a subset of the general fund, and it's going to be Fund 003 that's labeled cumulative reserve for ARPA. So we wanted to keep it separate because we didn't want it skewing our general fund balance to make it look like we had a bunch more money in there than we actually do. As we figure out a spending plan, we'll talk about how we're going to do the accounting. But for right now, with us getting the money tomorrow, we needed to create something to put the money in. So it's going to be totally separate. You'll see it next month on the June financials, and it'll be labeled ARPA so everybody can see it. As far as budget amendments, it's time for our quarterly budget amendment. So our second one of the biennium, which is on the agenda for Monday. It's pretty short. Council has already approved everything in it, so I didn't put it in this packet. It only contains 3 items. We are adding the airport COVID grant for $9,000 to the budget on both the revenue and expense side. We have the bulletproof vest grant for the police department, where we're adding the grant revenues, the grant expenses, and also our match, which is $3,000. And then Nick has the the water treatment plant distribution pump addition for the $83,000 that's also on there. So he's on the line to talk a little bit more about that in detail. But as far as the agenda goes, we have been keeping that spreadsheet for the budget amendments for council. So there's a page that's tracking our first budget amendment and kind of where we're at with those. And then I added a new sheet for the second budget amendment. So we'll just continue to keep adding to that every quarter. So you guys have a status of where we're at with those amendments. So I think that's all I have on financials. Let's open it up for questions.
So Angie, I have a question, and
Sure.
I went onto the state auditor site to see if I could get the answer. But with the ARPA money coming in, and one of the things that I pull and compare Ocean Shores to other like cities just to see how we're trending, but I don't understand of what they are doing with their reporting for the ARPA money.
I've been checking their website every day. Honestly, we got the notice that we were getting this funding, and I don't think that people were really prepared.
Okay.
So we've been trying to figure out what codes to use, what we're supposed to do with it, how to report it. So like you said, if you've been on there, it's pretty quiet at this point. I'm expecting some guidance to come out because the governments are going to be like, hey, this is in our bank account. What are we supposed to be doing? Right. But at this point, I couldn't really find anything concrete either. So that's why I think our safest bet is just put it in a subset of the general fund, because we don't know how we're going to spend it yet, as far as, if it's going to be capital projects or we're going to use some for utilities. So basically, we're not restricting it in any way at this point because we don't have a spending plan for it yet. So safest bet, just put it out there separately in the general fund until we can figure out with council what our spending plan is going to be.
Oh, and I'm fine with that. I just thought the state auditors would have been a little bit ahead of it. Of this is kind of what we would like to see, but I'm fine. I'm just curious. I was just trying to look to see of the past ARPA money, of if there was any way that I could look what other cities did and where it is, and I can't make. No. I don't know where it is.
So basically, with the CARES Act, the guidance was to create revenue codes for it, but use your existing expense codes. So that's why I worked with Sarah, and she kept internal records of everything we spent for CARES. We're going to do something similar for ARPA, because in the end, we're going to get audited. They're going to want to know how we spent that money. And so we have to be very diligent in tracking it and making notes to say, this was approved by this person on this day. So we're going to do something similar. I think the plan was to keep a spreadsheet that she's going to be updating probably monthly to kind of coincide with these meetings to see where we're at with the ARPA. So we're going to be very transparent with it. We're going to keep very diligent records on it, because in the end, we're going to get audited and we're going to need all that anyway.
Okay. I have one other question, but I don't want, Catherine may have some questions.
Okay. I do actually, and one of them is a follow-up to what John just asked. Why not? I understand now that for the COVID CARES money, they didn't require us to do a separate spending stream uses, but why not do that? I mean, it seems to me it would be so much easier just to create those codes under this number 003 so that people could follow it, and anybody else who's looking could follow it.
Well, I think it comes down to when we do our annual report for the auditors, and when I was talking about fund types, depending on where you spend the money from, it has to be reported out of either a proprietary fund, which is our utility funds, a special revenue fund, the general fund. So I think by creating one fund and trying to spend everything out of there, it wouldn't be a true reflection of what fund types we should be using. So if we spread this out between capital projects and utilities and special revenue funds, I think that's why they were like, just use your existing expenses in your funds. but make sure you have something to track so that you can document what you're doing with the money to make sure it's allowable. So when we get into the expense side of it, we're going to have to figure out some of the items might be direct expenses out of that fund because they are general fund related. But then other stuff, like if we use money for the shared utility, we're most likely going to have to transfer money into there because we have to keep our fund accounting correct. Does that make sense?
That's what I was thinking. It'd be a transfer out of 003 into 401 or 438 or
exactly
the numbers are.
Yep. And then we would expend the money out of the actual fund to make sure our fund reporting is correct.
Right.
This is all assuming the auditors release some guidance and that's what they want us to do. I'm still waiting to see. We're just I've been checking daily. So.
And my other question is regarding the financial report. So if John has something still on this ARPA, I can step back for a minute.
My questions are not on ARPA.
Okay. So, well, it's your turn.
Okay. So my first question, because I have two remaining ones. My first question is that there is an adjustment made for $25,642 under hotel motel. What was that?
So that is, if you read up in the top of the executive summary page, because the hotel motel taxes come in like in big waves, we do a biennial adjustment for them. Because if we just took the hotel motel tax like in January, it would look like we're super low and under target because we get all of our money throughout the summer. So it's just an adjustment to kind of even those out across the biennium.
Okay, I guess I should have read the top. I was just looking at
It's okay. It's okay. We do that for property taxes too, because property taxes are only paid a couple times a year.
Okay, and then my final question is.
Wait, it's my turn.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll just ask. A couple people have asked me about this big jump in the May month-to-date revenues into the general fund. And I'm going to make a wild guess, or maybe it's a sophisticated wild guess, that that's a tranche of funds coming from property tax because the property taxes were due by April 30th. Would that be, it's up like over $1 million.
Yeah, so you'll see if you look in prior months, when the property taxes start exceeding that adjustment amount in that revenue adjust line, we just remove it. So yeah, you're gonna see where it does kind of go up for a while and then it'll come back down. And then we have to start doing those adjustments again. I will say though, if the general fund is way ahead of target because of the sales tax numbers, as well as the building permits. So there's a few things going on there. It's just been really, really busy and we're still way over target. So, but yeah, the property taxes definitely play into it as well.
Okay, they were asking whether it was the ARPA funding hitting or something else, and I figured it was property tax. I just wanted to be able to let them know so that it would make more sense to them.
Yeah, so the ARPA will hit in June.
Yeah.
It won't be in the general fund. It'll be a separate 003 fund.
Right. But will it show up on the financials now?
Yep, it will. It's right under your guys' council contingency fund.
Good. Your turn, John.
Okay, so kind of along the same lines that Catherine was talking about, general fund from last month or 2 months ago, we went from 3.6 in the general fund up to 4.6. So we jumped in $1 million, which is what the revenue is. And I know some of it is timing where it comes in, but even $1 million jump in general fund and general revenue fund for 1 month is more than we're probably going to be using. So and I know I know we've been talking about this and we've been looking at it. So our numbers are way above 1.5, which is our talking point. How much do you think, and I know there's a lot of other things, like the lawsuit is something that we have to have a discussion about of funding, but where do you think the general fund at the end of the year is going to end based on our current trend?
Well, I ran the numbers as of the end of May. If we ended the biennium at the end of May, our surplus would be about 1.4 million. You have to remember, we're going to have a big payment coming up of almost 700,000. So if you consider that, it's about 750 as a surplus. I know we have still some discussions to do about the settlement payment. At this point, it was made out of the general fund in June because we had to get it paid. We were on a timeline. So that payment will show up in next month's financials. So I'm not sure if the mayor has more of an update later in our meeting, but I know that council will be talking about that at a later date too.
Okay.
And I just pulled up the county treasurer report for May, and our general fund property taxes were 1.16 million. So that might be a good talking point.
Okay. I've got one more question, but Catherine?
Mine was on a different topic. And it might be a question for the mayor, so I can hold on that.
Okay. And then my final one is the council discretionary fund. That first question is, what is the limit on how much can be in the discretionary fund? And the second one is there any, say the fund was zero, is there any limit on how much can be put back in at one time?
Okay, so the maximum, I believe, is 0.0375 cents per thousand of our assessed value. And I believe that was, last time I looked, it was somewhere around 560. Don't quote me on that. And we're anticipating being at 350,000 at the end of the biennium. So that's the cap. You can transfer in as much as you want at one time, but you can't exceed that cap that is set by state law.
Okay, I'm done.
All right. So on to utility billing aging reports. The trend kind of continues as far as the residential side. So if you scroll down a little bit more, Sandy, to June. There we go. So the residential is holding pretty steady at 107,000. We have heard some of our hotels have received some rescue plan funding. So some of them have been making some payments to bring that one down a little bit. So overall, the commercial side's looking a little better, but the residential side is still holding. I know as we get into talking about the ARPA spending plan, this has been brought up as a potential area to look into to kind of offer some support for these accounts that are going to be struggling once we are allowed to do shutoffs again. So any questions on that?
Just an observation that I'm glad that it's on our agenda for the Monday council meeting, so we can sort of flesh out the conversation we had a couple months ago and sort of give some suggestions.
Yeah.
And I just this may be more of a conversation for ARPA, but I know that I was talking to the PUD, kind of how they're handling it, because they have even a more significant number that we have. And philosophically, we were just having the conversation about the people that are in real need versus some of the people that have just decided not to pay. And the PUD is working on on trying to come up with some other solutions. I mean, just to balance it. But, you know, one of the things that, however we do it, I mean, that we're $107,000 upside down, which is there, but I'm sure there's going to be another step that if we were to do anything, to talk about how to really help the true people that are in need with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked the idea of the Greater Grace Harbor potentially helping with this and doing kind of an application process, and because it is true, you want to target the people that actually need it. And there are some on the list that are, you know, we've seen them in the past as kind of repeat offenders, but there are also some that need help too. So it's a matter of trying to figure out whether we do an application to demonstrate a need or how we manage it. So, but it's definitely a concern. We went through this a few years back with starting the shutoffs, and it's going to be a struggle. So.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Good morning. Do I have the ability to do a screen share?
Sarah, I'm not real familiar on how to do that. I mean, I can struggle along and see if I can figure out how to do that for you.
I think that I can request it and it might come on over to you. Share screen. Host disabled participant share screen. So you might have.
Let me try this. Okay. So I made you a co-host.
Oh, yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sandy.
You're welcome.
Okay, so what I'm sharing today, I didn't have a chance to get to Sarah ahead of time. When I started delving into eligible costs for ARPA and all of the regulations, you know, it was really hard to pull out a bullet point list based on the wishes provided in the council recommendations. First, these aren't clearly defined. As you know, it was just kind of a brainstorming session. So some of these items aren't necessarily defined out as far as what kind of services we'd like to provide. So what I did here was provide all of the websites to the guidances that I have found to utilize ARPA funding and the eligible costs. With this, I have shown here where the funding expires, what our allocations are expected to be, and the resources in which they fall under, including MRCS, because that has been a good document to look at. But this is also directly from the U.S. Treasury and from the Code of Federal Regulations. And what I'd like to highlight out here is this website.
Sarah?
Basically, there's just, oh, go ahead.
Sarah, can you make this bigger? We can't see anything but just a little blur of, yes, there's words
Oh,
there.
my apologies.
Right.
Sure. Is that better?
Yeah, a little bigger would be good. Okay, great. Thank you.
So here we show our 2021 and our 2022 payments. Now this was clipped directly from the allocation provided by the state. We are considered a non-entitlement unit because we didn't receive like the first round of funding. We were passed through from the state. We have until December 31st, 2024 to expend our funding. And here is where we start delving into the different guidance documents directly from the U.S. Treasury as it relates to the non-entitlement units. Now, I didn't pull information out directly because we don't have a firm wish list, for lack of a better term, right now, and it's a vast. There are vast eligible costs. I mean, it's a lot of research. So I feel like the more that we are all familiar with these documents, the better. What I would like to point out here is the second website provided came from that Federal Register that I just mentioned. And this is the exact verbiage that was provided in that guidance. To respond to, and as I go along, I'm going to actually kind of bullet point these out, and I will provide this to Sandy to provide to the committee and for access after the meeting. But these are directly from the Federal Register, which is our guiding documents for all of federal funds. To respond to public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. Now, I did notice that in the frequently asked questions guidance document, which is provided further below, when it further discusses tourism, it does discuss infrastructure that relates to it and our economic recovery. So I found that interesting. The second bullet point, B, to respond to workers performing essential work during COVID-19 public health emergency by providing premium pay to eligible workers. C, for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to the COVID-19 public health emergency relative to revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year prior to the emergency, and to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. So I found that very interesting because these are things that we've continued to talk about. In addition, Congress clarified two types of uses which do not fall within these two categories, and that is directly or indirectly offsetting a reduction in the net tax revenue of the state or territory resulting from a change of law, regulation, or administrative interpretation. So we cannot use for depositing funds into any pension plan as well. So that's the gist of everything, but when we delve further down, we start getting into these frequently asked questions directly from the U.S. Treasury, and this is where I found the information in regard to tourism infrastructure. So if working from a compliance standpoint, as we go through our asks and our needs to allocate this funding, if we can relate it to these items, it would be considered an eligible cost. I noticed that on the recommendation sheet, similar responses from all council members included assistance to nonprofits, small businesses, citizens to those in need. That was a common theme, and those need to be further defined out so we can determine whether they would be an eligible cost. But if we can relate it directly back to the pandemic, I imagine that we could justify it. And I would mirror Angie's recommendation that if we choose to distribute to those entities, that we utilize Greater Grace Harbor. That's what I have for you today. That's as far as I've really gotten to separate out this information, and I think it may take further clarification from council and the wishes to allocate this out to further define its eligibility. Any questions?
I have just a sort of observation and question. The agenda for our upcoming meeting has the list of council members' recommendations, but it doesn't include this. Is it possible to get this not only posted to the Finance Committee documents, but also out to all the council members so that when we get to that discussion point, we have a little bit more information?
Yes, ma'am, that was my hope. I talked to Angie about providing bullet lists as far as, you know, trying to identify exactly what we could pay out of this. And it's just so fast because it also incorporates those measures that we took last year to combat COVID-19 and, you know, prevent it. And so I didn't really have this ready for Sarah because I really wasn't sure of the direction that we were going. And Angie had made the recommendation that I provide those links that I've utilized for my research. So I did so, and I will forward this on to Sandy to include in this meeting so everyone can access it. Absolutely. I think it's imperative that all of our council people are well versed in these items, and it's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information.